Wright. I teach African American humanities and I teach African American humanities and American history at Valencia College. And it's interesting that I find myself back in this room where I did a presentation 3 years ago on DNA and tracing African ancestry. So I'm fortunate enough to have half of the PowerPoint already prepared so that it relates to what we're talking about today. I'd like to tell you a story about me and my experience. And I'm looking at it from the point of view of how we process data and how ancestry research provides material data for those of us who are connecting to our past, but how there is additional research that we can do that provides the metadata of who we are. We come from most of us in this room, and a lot of you out there watching, come from an era where we didn't have as much electronic processing of information. If you wrote something, it was probably on a Smith Corona typewriter, or if you're lucky to have someone in your family who was a legal secretary, like my dear sister, who typed 90 words a minute, could type my papers for me in a matter of hours, an IBM Selector. And if you wanted to make copies, you had to go to either a mimeograph machine or a Xerox machine. And because they were just hard copies, like the old television shows used to do when they used to trace where letters and things came from. They had to go back and look at 5, 10 different typewriters to see how the letters struck in a precise order, or how the letters matched up against each other. And then if there was a mimeograph or a Xerox, they might be able to find some sort of little note on the side of it that it was specify where the machine was from, or they could do a forensic analysis and look at the splatter of the inkjet to see what machine produced that particular copy. Today we got, you just press a button and it just copies. And that metadata that's produced, it'll tell you where your borrowed copy of Microsoft Word is coming from. It will tell you which machine it was originally copied on, or which machine it was originally written up on. And that's all the stuff that we have we can process that deep history. So beyond the data of ancestry research, we get metadata that can come through databases like the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, which I would like to introduce you to as I move forward. This is something about me. This is my family. At my father's my father's 70th birthday. We were all together, me, my sisters, and my brothers, and then at my mother's funeral ceremony. Me in the middle, my sisters, and my brother, and the sister to the left of me in the screen, to the right of me as I face it, is my younger sister, Yolanda. She's younger by 359 days, and for 1 week of my life, I was tortured with being her twin. We've since gotten to the point where we can laugh about it. I didn't laugh about it much back then. But this is my family, my father, Wright, and my mother, Jewel. Should be pointing at. Drayton, Jewel, my younger brother, Victor, my younger sister Yolanda, my older brother Derwin, my older sister Gail, and me when I had hair. And this is the story of our family. My sister Yolanda is the one who does all the ancestry research. And she's traveled, she's traced our family lineage back to when our ancestors were enslaved. I'm sorry, this didn't print up all the way I wanted to. I should have shrunk it down. But she tells a story, traces our lineage back from my father and my mother, back through both sides of our family. And it goes back to, what do we get? 1810, 1844. Pappy Jack, 1848. Grandpa Nash, born 1854. So a lot of, we've gotten all the way back to when our ancestors were enslaved. Beyond this, we don't know. We're just guessing. Like I said, when I was preparing to do a DNA presentation 3 years ago, I contacted my sister who had recently gotten our family's DNA done on her side. And it came up with these great numbers. It's like, oh, that's really cool, because I can do something with those numbers based on the research I've been doing. Because I knew that this number is very rare in African American DNA. I also knew that there was one particular place in the United States where there was a high percentage of Afan people from Fang and Akan people from Ghana, present-day Ghana, and that was in Virginia. And it fit in real good with the story that I knew. When I was young, I asked my mother, where did Grandpa's people come from? This is my grandfather, William McKinley Bowie. My mother had a very difficult relationship with her father. Her father had all sorts of issues. My aunt never allowed my grandfather into her house for reasons that you can imagine. But what little I knew came from my mother, who her reasoning was that, I wanted my children to know who their grandfather was. And the story she told me about where Grandpa came from was that he was the son of one of 3 brothers, one of whom was named Ruffin Bowie, who had come to Texas from Virginia after the Civil War. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I got black folks in my heritage who got that go west young man mentality. That's really cool. They came from Virginia, found their way west, they're doing their thing, and it fit my narrative. Except, then Yolanda sent me the link and she sent me the new DNA, and it's like, all the Ghana's gone. So there goes Grandpa coming from Virginia. Well, the historian part of me already knew that the part about Grandpa coming from Virginia needed some modification, because it's more likely that Grandpa's family came from Virginia, or Grandpa's ancestors came from Virginia through the domestic slave trade. It was not a joke back then when people said, we're going to sell your children down south. That was a threat to mothers and fathers to behave, to not get out of order, to get sold down south, and to be transferred from places like Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina to places like Mississippi and Alabama, where the work was a lot harder, the work was a lot more intense. But the 2019 update, I haven't looked at it more recently, puts us, interestingly enough, in the Cameroon, Congo, Benin, Togo area, which gives us sort of like a nice confluence of the Bight of Benin and the northwest part of West Central Africa. And I lead you to that because 2000, I was playing with a band leader named Ricardo Limbo, and the band was called Máquina Loca. And in the band, on our first European tour, was this gentleman here, Opal Manziamina. Opal is a Congolese guitarist and bass player. Opal was a joy to play with because Opal knew soukous and Congolese rumba inside and out. Every rehearsal with Opal was like a lesson. Opal liked the brown liquor too, so after he got a little of the brown liquor into him, he could be kind of a jerk. And one night after a show in Utrecht, I came to get on the van back to the hotel, and as I walked onto the bus, Opal shouted out, "Eric, me, real African, you, photocopy." And I'm like, wow, I ain't never heard that before, and I'm processing it because there's a lot of different ways to take it. Meanwhile, my buddy, John Roberts, who I often room with, John is affectionately referred to in the African American community as one of those people that we know as a good white boy. John had my back no matter what. I knew that John was gonna have my back. And it was also cool to know that John was gonna have your back because John ran marathons and I didn't do no kind of running. And at that time, I was sitting next to John and John said, "Man, that's not cool." I said, "No, John, like, let me process it." He said, "No, man, that's messed up. I'm gonna say something to him." I'm like, "Well, no." I'm like, this is the first time that an African man had acknowledged my Africanness. But it was a secondhand acknowledgement, but I still had to take it. Because at the time, when I joined the band, Ricardo had just released his album, South Salvador. And the title track of the song, it was a ballad, and it featured an accordion player playing behind the lyrics. And when we got to the rehearsal, my first rehearsal, Ricardo's going like, "Oh man, I really want to play this song, but we don't have an accordion player." So I said, "Well, man, I can put a mute in, and I can play along with you." And he said, "Okay." So we tried that, but he was like, "Nah, you're playing too many notes." I'm like, "Look, man, I play jazz. I gotta play notes." He says, "Nah, but you gotta do it like on the record." I'm like, "All right." So I'm gonna have to listen to this record and see how she's doing it on the accordion, and then I have to come up with something that's similar to her because I'm not gonna copy her stuff. And I had to listen to the record over and over. And I don't do lyrics. My wife can tell you that not only do I not do lyrics, the lyrics that I do are usually wrong. We were driving someplace one time and I was singing this song that popped into my head by Elton John about a rocket man. I'm like, "Rocket